It's been an interesting series from my perspective. I've had feedback from different ones of you that has been very helpful. Those of you who have said, well, this lesson would be an important one for me, or that lesson would be, it has served to remind me that we can learn a great deal from each other. But maybe the thing that has been the most interesting to me has been the number of you who have come to me and who have said, wow, if I had known this or that or the other thing back when I was a parent, maybe it would have gone better. Well, I join you in that. That is a reality. In fact, I've come to the conclusion that parenting happens between two other ages in our lives. The first age is the age when we know all the answers to parenting. Know them all. Unfortunately, that's the same age when we don't have kids. The other age is the age when we think, well, I have a reasonable handle. I have some reasonably good ideas about parenting. But unfortunately, that's in the empty nest years. They're already gone by then. Between those two ages is when parenting happens. We hold on, we hang on, we pray, we survive, we do the very best we can, and we depend on two things. We depend, number one, on the abundant grace and mercy of God. And number two, we depend on the amazing resilience of our children. It's amazing that some of them survive us, to be quite frank with you. So it's been very interesting, as my purpose has been simply to share 4 lessons that I learned along the road in the journey of parenting. I learned every one of them from someone else. First lesson, as I've shared with you, the lesson of tomorrow, I learned from my wife, Anita, who asked me one day, what are you going to do when she's 15? That was the first one. Second was the lesson of character. Lesson of character came to me by way of John Townsend and Henry Cloud, and there are 2 words, empathy, reality. Our kids need healthy helpings of each, and our task as parents is to keep them in balance. Third lesson was the lesson of memories. Came to me by way of Dennis Guernsey, who said, you'll never be a perfect parent, never. Give that up if that's your expectation. What you can do is create more good memories than bad. So use your words to create a wealth of good memories in your child's heart. And now today, the fourth. The fourth lesson, the lesson of blessing, came to me by way of Gary Smalley and John Trent, actually in a book entitled simply The Blessing. In a new and revised edition of that book, John Trent begins the book in the preface by telling the story of how he began on the journey that ultimately led to this book. It came during the time that he was an intern at a psychiatric hospital. In one day, his first day actually in that psychiatric hospital, he had 2 experiences that formed the foundation for what later would become not only the book called The Blessing, but a whole concept that has blessed many, many people. I want to read to you from his words the first experience he had that day. Trent writes this, that day at the hospital, I spent a full shift sitting next to a young man on 24-hour suicide watch. He was tall, handsome, well-mannered, and an excellent student. In fact, he had been a straight A student in high school and for 3 years of college. But when he caught the flu the first semester of his senior year, that all changed. In a required PE course that he had put off until then, he missed so many classes because of the flu that his instructor gave him an automatic grade reduction to B for the semester. When the young man found out that there was no extra credit, no way to substitute other classes, and now no way to change his grade or drop the course, he fell into instant despair. He left the teacher's office, went back to his dorm room, and tried to take his own life. He would have succeeded had his roommate not unexpectedly and providentially returned. As we sat and talked, and as I tried not to stare at his bandaged wrists, this young man poured his heart out to me. His story included a brilliant, demanding engineer father who had himself gotten straight A's and demanded nothing less from his oldest son. It highlighted how hard he had tried all his life to gain his father's favor, and it ultimately led to how his failing to get an A in tennis brought the death of a dream and nearly his own death as well. This young man desperately yearned for something he couldn't quite define, something that was always in sight, yet something never within reach. His heartbreaking tale left a haunting, indelible impression on me. That was the first experience that day. The second experience happened that night at home. He got home a bit late, ate some supper, and then went into the study. He had to make preparation because the next day at his church, he was to lead the discussion, teach the lesson at the couple's Bible class. So he went and got the Bible and went to the text that was his for the day, Genesis 27. He thought, I'll speed read the text, and then I'll come up with some inspired and inspiring thoughts, and then I'm going to bed. So he sat down and he began to read that chapter 27 of Genesis, the story of two brothers, twin brothers, fraternal twins, named Jacob and Esau. And they're grappling, wrestling, fighting with each other. And all that unfolded in that struggle. As he read that story, he got drawn in. In fact, something within him began to haunt him. He began to realize not only the young man at the hospital that day, seeking the blessing. Not only these two young men in the passage were seeking the blessing, but that he himself had spent much of his life seeking the blessing. Sleep fled from his eyes, and he spent many hours that evening, not just in studying the text, but in looking at his own heart and realizing the points of intersection between that story and his. It would be a day that would change his life forever. Well, I want to go to that text with those two stories in the background, and I want to ask, what is it about this text that has an enduring significance, maybe for all of us, but certainly for those of us who are parents? So I'm going to take you to Genesis, the 27th chapter. It's page 38, right near the beginning of your pew Bible, page 38. But I want to warn you of something before we read the text. It's a long text. We're going to read the whole thing because I think it's a benefit. But I want to warn you, as we read this story, you're going to encounter what we, from the perspective of the 21st century, would call a dysfunctional family. Bible doesn't call them that, but we would call them that. I mean, you think about what you find here. You will find here a set of parents, I think they're close, but apparently not close enough, who have two sons, twins, fraternal, who do not get along, between whom there's a great deal of sibling rivalry. The parents each has a favorite, something that the sons apparently know. The younger son tries to get something that really should belong to the older son, only to have the older son find out about it, threaten to kill him, only to have the mother intervene and tell the younger son, get out of town, I got some family down the road, go stay there till the danger passes. By the time you're done reading, you say, this is a dysfunction. This puts the fun back in dysfunctional. This is an amazing family. Well, notice what happens in the story. Genesis chapter 27, we begin reading in verse 1. When Isaac was old, and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and said to him, my son, here I am, he answered. Isaac said, I am now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. Now Rebekah, his wife, was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies. Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. His mother said to him, my son, let the curse fall on me. Just go and do what I say. Go get them for me. So he went and got them, brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goatskins. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God gave me success," he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he proceeded to bless him. "Are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "I am," he replied. Then he said, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat so that I may give you my blessing." Jacob brought it to him, and he ate. And he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of heaven's dew and of earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." After Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father Isaac. Then he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game so that you may give me your blessing." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I'm your son," he replied, "your firstborn son, Esau." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me, me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came and deceitfully took your blessing." Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac answered Esau, "I have made him lord over you and have made all of his relatives his servants, and I've sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Then Esau wept aloud. His father Isaac answered him, "Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck." Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." Well, just a chapter out of this family's sad saga. It is a very intense, a very emotional chapter. There's a lot of sorrow, there's scheming, there's plotting, there's lying. It's all contained right here in this one chapter of this family's story. And it all has to do with one reality: the father's blessing. Each wants the father's blessing. The mother wants the father's blessing for her favorite son. That's what the whole story is about. We want your blessing. And thus it is when Rebekah hears her husband speaking to his oldest son, his favorite son Esau, she goes immediately to his brother and says to him, "Jacob, I've got a plan. This is what we can do. Here's how we can take care of it." And he says, "But mother, I don't know about that. I mean, I may be able to deceive him with what I say, but when he touches me, no way. Instead of a blessing, I'll end up with a curse." And she says, "Look, let the curse fall on me. You go and do what I tell you to do." He says, "Okay." Now, can I just say one thing? Esau must have been one hairy dude. I mean, think about that. What? You're going to cover up so that he'll think it's meat? You're going to use goat skins? You're kidding me? This guy must have had a lot of hair. In fact, you go back to Genesis 24 and you read about the birth. And when these fraternal twins are born, it says that Esau was so hairy that he was like a garment of hair. His mother must have said, "What have I given birth to? What in the world is this?" And so they named him hairy. That's what the name Esau means, hairy. Not as in Truman or Potter, not that kind of hairy. No, hairy as in, wow, you got a lot of hair. That's what they named him. I mean, that was the custom in that day and time. You would name kids according to some characteristic, maybe a personality characteristic or maybe a physical characteristic. I'm kind of glad we've gone away from that habit, aren't you? I mean, you'd have to say, this is my son. His name is Conehead. I'm glad we don't have. This is my daughter. Her name is Fat Cheeks. I mean, I'm glad we don't have that habit anymore. But such was the habit in that day and time. So they took one look at him. They weren't a terribly creative family, and they named him Hairy. Esau. So much hair did he have that when his mother says, "Okay, I'm going to deceive your father," she has to actually get animal skins so that when his father touches him, he says, "Ah, that's my son. That's Esau." And so that's exactly what his mother and his brother do to him. They conspire together, they collude together, they concoct this scheme, and it works. He walks into his father and he says, "I am Esau." But he isn't. He says, "I have done what you asked me to do." But he didn't. He says, "The way I did it so quickly is that the Lord your God gave me success." And he hadn't. And then he takes all of those things and gives the reason for which he's doing all of this. He says, "Please bless me." Now, I want you to think about that. Here you have a child who's pretending to be someone they're not, pretending that God is in their life in a way that he isn't, doing what he thinks will please his father, lying about all of it in the attempt to get the father's blessing. That will not be the last child in history to do that. Please bless me. It's an emotionally laden story. I mean, did you pay attention to some of the language in the story when Esau shows up? Language like trembled violently, a loud and bitter cry, wept bitterly. There's a lot of emotion in this story, not just the emotions of sorrow, but the emotion of rage and anger. When my father dies, I'll kill my brother. But for me, the most haunting, the most plaintive words in the story are the words of Esau when he says, "Do you have only one blessing, Father? Only one? Bless me too, my Father." Haunting words. Words that have actually echoed and re-echoed, not just through the centuries, but through the millennia since Esau first uttered them. They are still thought, they are still spoken, they are still acted out to this very day and time. Could have been just this last football season, a high school student manages to lunge over the goal line, planting the ball in the end zone. They've won the game. There is an immediate celebration, pandemonium on the field, cheering in the stands. He can hardly move for the kids piling on top of him, but as he emerges from it, his eye scans the stands, looking for one male face. Bless me, my Father. the words still echo. They may echo this graduation season when the name is read, Mary Doe, summa cum laude. Thunderous applause. People stand to their feet. She walks across the stage, takes the sheepskin, celebrates with joy, turns around, smiles into the camera. But then after the picture, her eye scans the audience, looking for that woman's face. Bless me, my mother. Could happen this summer. At a wedding altar, couple stands there and he beams. I do. She whispers, I do. And she looks over the shoulder of her new spouse, looks at a man's face, and thinks in her mind, I've married someone just like you, Dad. Would you bless me now? Make no mistake, the words of Esau continue to echo. Bless me, my father. Bless me, my mother. Now, maybe you will say to me, but the blessing in that day and time, the Old Testament world, and the blessing in this day and time, 21st century Southern California, are different, aren't they? And I would say to you, yes, there clearly are differences between them. About that, let there be no question. But I would further suggest to you that there is one reality that binds the two together, and that is the reality that craves the smiling, loving, approving, accepting face of the parent. In fact, I jotted down a few ways, a few similarities and differences between blessing in the world of Genesis and blessing in our day and time. Then the blessing was given once. Now the blessing must be given regularly. Then the blessing was usually given near the time of the parent's death. Now the blessing must be given all through the child's life. Then the blessing transferred assets and dealt with inheritance issues. Now the blessing transfers the parent's goodwill and creates an inheritance of goodwill. Then the blessing was a formal ceremony. Now the blessing takes place in 1,000 informal settings. Then the blessing was normally given only to the oldest son. Now the blessing is ideally given to every child in the family. Then in the blessing it was understood that words had great power. Now, in seeking to bless children, there is a failure to understand that words have great power. We say, well, why didn't he just change what he said to Jacob? Why didn't he just change it and give it to Esau? Because there was an understanding that said the words that are spoken are powerful. They are binding. Once they are uttered, they cannot be recovered. Sometimes we fail to understand the power of the words and the actions which we undertake, not just with our children, though certainly there, but with every other person in our lives. It's a power that is understood clearly by an Old Testament scholar, arguably the greatest living Old Testament scholar today. He was here just several months ago, the invitation of the School of Religion and Zach Plantak, professor. His name was Walter Brueggemann. Walter Brueggemann writes about this act of blessing that took place between Isaac and his sons with these words. The narrative assumes and affirms that spoken words shape human life. Language is not simply an exercise in propaganda and manipulation, as it tends to be in our modern world. Words here are not a matter of indifference, which may be attended to or not as is convenient. Here, when words are spoken by authoritative persons in proper context, they have substance. They mean what they say. They must be handled with respect, for they are a means towards life or death. No wonder Esau cries, "My father, do you not have a blessing for me? Bless me, my father, too." And the cry continues. It continues from some who are grown children and from some who are growing children. So maybe as a parent, you ask the question, how exactly do I bless them? How do I bless my kids? There may be 1,000 ways to do it. Certainly it means that a mother might say to her daughter, "Sweetheart, I love you and you belong to this family. I don't care what grade you make. You are us. We are you." It may be the father who speaks to the son who is devastated after the ball game, and the father turns his son's chin up and looks him in the eye and says, "Listen, son, I love you whether you score or whether you fumble. That doesn't matter here. Here we take you in because you are ours." It's the set of parents that say, there is nothing you can do, nothing you must do to earn our love. In fact, maybe it looks like what somebody shared with me just down here, an hour or two ago after first service. Father stopped me. Said, "What you spoke of this morning, I know that." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "My son was grown, a grown man, married with his own kids. And we were going through a really rough patch. And one day in the midst of this rough patch, I looked at him and I said, and called him by name. I'll say his name was Jim. That's not what it was. Looked at him and called him by name, and I said to him, 'Jim, whatever else, I just want you to know one thing. I'm proud of you.' He said, I walked away and forgot it. I ran into and talked some with his wife 2 weeks later. She said to me, 'You know that what you said to Jim that day? He's spoken of nothing since. Nothing else since. It's all he can talk about.' An aging father saying to a grown son, 'I'm proud of you.' The blessing. The blessing that children and grown children crave. How do we give it? In 1,000 different ways that communicate you cannot earn what I give you as a gift. The gift of love, of belonging, of nurture, of approval, of who you are, maybe not of what you do. The blessing. I look back at my own parents. They gave us that blessing in so many different ways. They made a few mistakes along the way. I just hope I make as few as they made. I do remember one instance, though, where that blessing came at a moment of serendipitous but deeply meaningful surprise. I was by now grown. I was at seminary. I was following in my father's footsteps in ministry, but my father's ministry world had been formed in a very different world than the world I was entering. My father's ministry world was a button-down world, a black suit, black tie, white shirt world, where there was to be no humor in the pulpit. That was not just him, that was the world of ministry. I was in seminary. I had been invited to speak at Seminary Chapel. I was excited about it. Such invitations weren't terribly common. I was very excited. Mom and Dad made the long trip to be there. They came and they sat right back about here. I remember in preparing the sermon, I remember thinking that this one part of the sermon might be fairly funny. I didn't know for sure how the audience, how the congregation would respond, but I wondered about my dad. And I preached. I came to that point, and actually, it was funnier than I expected. And people were really laughing. And I had to pause, and I just allowed my eye to scan the congregation till it came right over here. And I saw my father leaning forward, holding the pew in front of him because he was laughing so hard. And I felt blessed, deeply, richly blessed. I don't know where you'll do it with your children, but I do know that at all kinds of ages, their eyes will look to yours, wanting to see smile, wanting to see love, wanting to see pride. The cry still echoes, "Bless me, my father. Bless me, my mother." So here's what I would suggest. If you're a parent of a young child, don't let this day pass without picking that child up, holding them close, whispering in their ear, "Mommy, Daddy loves you to the moon and back." If you're a parent here and you're a parent of teenagers, going through the tough years of the teenage years, going through those experiences of having to draw boundaries, having to set limits, having to enforce consequences, don't let this day pass without saying to that teen, I know we've been through some hard times, and I know there's some things we still have to work out, but I want you to know one thing without any shadow of doubt. You never need to earn my love. I always will love you. And if you're a parent of grown children, grown and gone, parents now in their own right, don't let the day pass without picking up the phone and saying, "I know I did some things wrong, and I hope I did some things right, but I just want you to know I am so proud of you." Don't let the day pass. Answer that cry. Give your child the blessing. And then just watch what God's blessing and yours can do in their life. Gracious God, we are so thankful that at moments when we didn't deserve it, you blessed us. We call that grace. Lord, let us pass that same grace on to our children. Let us let them know that we love and care, are proud of, and bless them. Turn your blessing loose in every life is my prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.